You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
All right, folks, welcome back to Crimson Cast. Scott here with you. I am joined by Ryan Phillips of Assembly Call. My wife listens to the podcast sometimes, but I will give her credit. When we started doing this a couple years ago, and we called it the Two Co-Pilots, No Pilot podcast, which I love. She's like, that was really like, one day she's like, I listened to that. That was really funny. I'm like, oh, like, are you listening? She's like, well, I listened to that and I stopped listening. like Galen's really good. It's like, all right, I'm enough out of you, babe. Like, we're done. But so this is our annual, we should do it like semi-annual crossover. The two co-pilots. I just had a moment where I'm like, all right, where's the Crimson Cast intro music? We're already at 10,000 feet and the plane's a little bit shaky. But Ryan, man, how you doing?
I'm good, man. We're the guys that don't do ad reads. You got to pay us extra for that. It's I'm good, man. I'm good. A lot going on the last couple. As we've been trying to set this episode up, I've just had tournament stuff for work, and I've been covering baseball and all of these things. So it's been so hard to actually get time to sit down. I finally get time to sit down today. My internet's out. So it's the world doesn't want this podcast to happen, and we are fighting against it to give it to people.
And we're going to make it. It's going to be awesome. It's going to, when they do the rewatchables of this podcast, the stories about it are going to be fantastic. All right, let's get the bad ad reads out of the way. As you know, we are part of the Back Home Network. Back Home Network is presented by Homefield Apparel. Ryan, you came this year. We missed each other. I had to come back home
by like an hour.
Game, but you probably saw a lot of Homefield Apparel in the Bloomington area. Just probably the upstairs is all Homefield.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so crazy that how that company has gone from like our little buddies to like a juggernaut now.
Do you see them out in the wild, out in California?
What'd you say?
Do you see them out in the wild?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like, I there's a lot of USC and UCLA stuff from LA down to the border. It's a lot of UCLA and USC stuff. So, but you'll see, it's funny. I actually ran into somebody in my coffee shop that's a mile from here, ran into a kid, and he saw my IU hat, and we started talking. He was wearing, and he took his jacket off, and he had a Homefield Indiana shirt on because he had just come back from his first semester at IU.
That's great.
Yeah, so he came up to me, and it's just local coffee shop in San Diego, less than a mile, and was just hanging out. He came up to say, "Go Hoosiers," and we were talking, and they took his jacket off, and he had a Homefield shirt on, and I was like, "Oh, of course he does."
That's great. Well, if you go to Ryan's coffee shop and you want to impress him as well, you don't have any Homefield stuff, go ahead and use the promo code HOME23 for 15% off your first purchase.
Yeah, there's a list of schools I approve. We'll put it in the link.
Oh, okay, beautiful. Is USC one of them, and UCLA?
Yeah, of course. No, UCLA, come on. No, we're a USC family over here.
Okay. Oh, you fight on. You do the fight on. I will say, not that UCLA has a great look and color scheme. I will say USC, UCLA, where they both wear their home uniforms at the game, because it's the best annual uniform game ever. I think Notre Dame and Penn State playing is usually a good one if they wear their classics. But USC, UCLA in the sunshine at the Rose Bowl on a Saturday, it doesn't get much better than that from a visual perspective. True, that's hard to beat.
Coliseum's not bad as well, let's be real. But
yeah. All right, finishing the ad reads, we are also on Substack here on Crimson Cast. Check us out on Substack. We have VIP content. You can catch all our videos. It's also nice. You just get an email for those of us who are older. You just get an email saying, "Hey, podcast is out." And it's like, great. I can check email. Definitely. You don't have to check all the other, social media things. And then also we are on YouTube. Check us out there. You can watch us. Both Ryan, you can see Ryan and I. If you don't want to listen to it, you can watch us do a podcast, and it's great times. We're actually getting a lot of really good comments on YouTube, just a lot of good commentary and connection through that way. So please check us out on YouTube, subscribe, and all of those things. Nope, I lost your mic.
Oh, I was going to say, nobody has ever said that sentence in the history of YouTube. We're getting a lot of good comments on YouTube.
we are. I mean, they're mostly relatively nice. A couple people, tell me I say too much, which is it's probably true. But go ahead and record yourself for an hour is what I would say, and then listen to all your own, mental and audio ticks, and it's fun times.
Yeah, it really is. You don't realize how you actually speak until you are forced to listen to yourself and watch yourself back. You don't realize all your. It's like you don't know somebody till you live with them. Until you have to bathe in your own voice and speaking method, you're never going to understand how it goes, because it sounds great in your head. Everything you're going to say sounds great in your head.
This is why, and then we'll move on. This is why when we got married, my wife and I got married, I did not want to have a videographer. Because pictures are beautiful and the pictures look great, but it's like, I don't want to go back and watch a video of my wedding, because in my mind, everything was perfect. Now, I'm sure I messed up. I'm sure I messed up words. I probably slipped a little bit. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things.
Ties off center.
Ties off center. One of my groomsmen's probably scratching himself or something. It's like, I don't know any of that. In my mind, it was all perfect. It was just beautifully sunlit, the golden hour of lighting, and it all looked perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah,
it's a smart idea. I mean,
for all you kids out there, don't go into videography. If you're getting a wedding, don't hire a videographer.
Someone's gonna have their phone camera out anyway. It's gonna.
Well, yeah, this was pre that.
Well, no, I'm saying now for the new kids.
So let's talk three things today. Let's talk big tournament. I want to kind of unpack the Woodson era a little bit, as much fun as that was, and then kind of see where we're going moving forward with DeVries. But you cover. For Sports Illustrated, you cover, the wider landscape than just the Indiana sphere. What are your thoughts on this tournament? First tournament with all one seeds. I will tell you this. I think I mentioned this in the pod, but if I didn't, here we go. I have a neighbor who's an accountant who was like telling me, 5 of the last 7 years, if you bet money line underdog on every single game in the tournament, you win money. I'm like, that sounds like fun. I love to gamble. So I set a limit. I was like $10 per game. There's 67 games, like $670. You're not going to lose all of it. But I was like, this will be a fun little experiment. It hasn't been fun.
No.
It hasn't been fun.
You're like, my kids can no longer go to college. It's
right. I'm thinking maybe, double or nothing next year with 200 a game. But anyway, it's been not only has there not been a lot of upsets, I think Galen did a really good pod talking about, some of the statistical reasons why. But I think the other thing that's been kind of a bummer with this tournament is there's also just haven't been a lot of good games. Like, even when there's years where there's not upsets, it's, a 1 seed could have a really close call. There's a great ending. It's like, a 1 seed beating an 8 seed in a great game, people look back fondly on. And that's the thing with the tournament. It's not just the upsets. You don't see a lot of the Florida Gulf Coast beating Georgetown because they won by like 15 points. You see a lot of the Bryce Drew shots because it's all the last second shots. And there's really not been, outside of Maryland, not a lot of good games.
Well, I think teams play to their competition a lot in the tournament because you have such a short amount of time to prepare for each one. So you don't have, I'm sure they have a detailed scouting outlook. They have all of that stuff, but it's hard to implement something when you have 3 days to practice it in some of these short weekends. And so I do think that teams play to each other's level a lot, and you haven't been seeing that this year. And I'll say there's a couple reasons why. One, I think the committee's getting really good at seeding teams. I think they're getting maybe too good. There's a lot of statistical analysis going on. There's a lot of analytics that go into it now, as opposed to just before. This was your record. You won the ACC. You beat these teams. These are how many losses you have. We're going to put you as a 1. The next guy down is going to be a 2. Now there's a lot that goes into it. The other thing is the transfer portal. Is that the best player from wherever, I'll just throw a random place out, like Murray State, is going to Duke now in his second year. And so I think that you are getting a lot of funneling of the top players to the top. Where you used to get a funneling of the top high school recruits to the top, you're also getting other guys now funneled to the top where the money is. And so I think that the gulf between teams has kind of, I don't think it's been crazy widened, but it's starting to stretch. And, things can still happen. You don't need to have the best players to win the game. But I also think we're also in a year where there were 4 teams that were pretty much clearly above the rest. And it was maybe like 5 or 6, but the top 4, who have been probably the top 4, you would say, for the whole season, are the teams that made the Final Four. And there's a reason I tweeted this a couple times. Everybody's giving Jay Billis crap for an all 1 seed Final Four. And I remember looking at the bracket. I actually didn't wind up filling one out this year because of time commitments and everything. And but I was looking at the brackets, and I'm like, I get how he got there. Like, these are 4 really good teams. And when you look at, quite frankly, you look at Auburn and Duke, and I know Houston's been great, Florida's been great, but you look at Auburn and Duke and how balanced and just good they are, and how well they play together and how they're actually kind of entertaining to. I hate Duke, but they're entertaining to watch and they're so talented. They're clearly the best teams.
Yeah.
And they've been the best teams all season long. And so it shouldn't shock us that they performed well in the tournament.
You talk about the gulf of talent. I've also noticed, as Indiana and Big Ten fans, there seems to be a real just gulf of talent between SEC schools and the Big Ten. You know, watching Michigan State play against Auburn, it's like, man, they cannot get within 10 points. Even when they played Ole Miss, I was watching that game, and it's like Ole Miss looks way more athletic.
Well, and I'll say this. I want to say this about Michigan State, because I think Michigan State had a phenomenal season, especially for not having really a star. I thought they had a great season. That was one of the better Tom Izzo seasons I've seen in a long time. Because sometimes it comes out to him just relying, they wind up relying on one guy too much. That was such a balanced team. They were fun to watch. They were tough. They lost significantly to Auburn. I mean, they made it a little bit closer at the end, but it was, Auburn had them by about 12 to 15 points for most of the game. And I didn't think Michigan State was playing that badly. It was just Auburn's really good. And, they were missing some shots and it was a slow start for the Spartans, but like, Auburn's just good. Like that was, that was one of those where you can't be upset if that's your team's effort in the Elite Eight and you lose. You can't really be upset because you were playing such a good team. What Bruce Pearl is doing there, man. It's one of the funnier things to me too is the coaches in this are Kelvin Sampson, who we know his history, Bruce Pearl, who we know his history, and then Todd Golden, who was on staff with Bruce Pearl at one of his stops, so he was through, he learned under Bruce Pearl, and then John Shire, who is just like squeaky clean guy. But like the other three are all kind of like playing in those gray areas you have to play in college basketball, and then they getting rewarded for it.
I want to come back to the Auburn, like the player comp to the Big Ten, but it always, I find it so funny, especially with what IU did with Kelvin Sampson, that there is this system within college basketball and the media infrastructure for exactly what you're talking about, that guys get in the gray, people get kind of worked up for a little bit, and then literally, maybe unlike any other sport, winning cures everything in college basketball, because they talk about Kelvin Sampson like, man, he's just glowing talk about Sampson, glowing talk about Bruce Pearl, not nary a word. I remember when Bill Self was like being investigated by the FBI and they made the Final Four, and it's like, oh, Bill Self just turning this team around, such a nitty-gritty coach. Like, all of it goes away. It is so
winning cures all, man.
Yeah, winning cures all. But in college basketball, it really does. It is just, they understand they are partners, and we're going to kiss the ass of every college coach. And even if they did something wrong or blew up a program, don't care, because they're here now, and they're gritty coach, and just, he knows how to get kids doing what he wants to do. It's wild to see, and it continues to happen. And it's so funny when teams get nervous, or they have kind of their own little, 2-week media cycle of being scared about little things that happened on the recruiting side, like those kinds of things. And then it's just like, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares.
What's funny to me is the hindsight, kind of rewriting of all of that, like, well, Kelvin Sampson, what he did wasn't that big a deal. It's like, well, no, it's not that what he did. It's that he was instructed specifically not to do it, did it, then lied about it. It's the cover-up is always worse than the crime. I mean, with Bruce Pearl, he had Aaron Kraft to a barbecue and then told everybody involved to lie about it, lied about it, avoided like any kind of responsibility for it. And that's why he got, hammered, not because he had a kid do a barbecue, but because of everything else that went along where he tried to manipulate the process and all of that. So I think that people forgive it because the crime isn't in the grand scheme. Oh, you paid a player a little bit extra money. I mean, who cares in these days? It's like, well, no, but it was illegal, and we all agreed not to do that. It doesn't mean it wasn't happening, but don't get caught. And then on top, that's how it feels with some of the old school guys, when they get caught. Like Rick Pitino, perfect example. Like, he played in those margins for decades, finally got caught, and now he's being celebrated for bringing St. John's back from the dead.
Right.
And he's a great coach. He is, but not the best person.
The question for Sampson is, I mean, I always looked at it as, in a way, I almost don't even blame Sampson anymore, because like he does what he does, and he shouldn't have, he was told not to do it, but it's like, that's kind of on IU. Like, you hire a guy who's in a show cause, and then you're shocked when he plays a little bit in the gray. It's like, what were you expecting? Like, if you hire him, you have to be willing to play a little bit in the gray. Here's the thing that I'm trying to remind people is, and hopefully we see this with DeVries moving forward, but it's like, it's not that hard to turn it around when you're a good coach. Sampson in year 2, and I forget the exact day he was fired, but it was right in that Michigan State Purdue range. But on February 19th, they were 22-4 and 11-2 in the Big Ten.
They were headed to a 1 seed.
Yeah, he was. That was his second year. I've been having fun just thinking, let's just pretend IU has stones and it's just like, hey, we're gonna fight through this, and they just plow ahead. And they're like, we're not firing him. And, we have minor sanctions, whatever. And we just have Sampson the entire time between now and then and now. I have a hard time seeing what he's done at Houston, the way that he's coached, the way he turned it around at Indiana. I have a hard time believing we haven't been to a Final Four and possibly have another banner.
Oh, multiple Final Fours, multiple Big Ten championships, no question at all in my mind. The guy can coach. He's a phenomenal basketball coach. I mean, there's no question about that. You saw it at Indiana in his brief tenure there. I mean, what he was able to do. They were one of the best teams in the nation in his second year. And I mean, we know there's a lot of garbage going on behind the scenes, not just with the recruiting stuff, but with the players as well. But he put together a really good team who was really tough. And I think that you're right about Indiana not playing in the gray. I think that there was a disconnect really about the greater world of college basketball. But not only that, but the idea that this has happened a couple times in Indiana where the athletic director doesn't really make the hire. Right. And that comes from above. And I think that it was Rick Greenspan at the time tried to put guardrails in, because I'm sure he knew that that was not the only thing Kelvin Sampson had done. And so he tried to put the guardrails in place and basically said, I'm washing my hands of this, because this is the best I can do is hire this guy and put the guardrails in place. And the guardrails was very firmly in place. It wasn't like they were misunderstood. Everybody who covered the team knew the rules, not just, so everybody on the team. And then, they break them, and not just break them once. It was flagrantly just being like, yeah, who gives a shit?
Right.
Like, I mean, it was, and then they got caught doing it. And so I think there was just it has always been a disconnect in Indiana of like how you win and like doing it the right way and all of that stuff. And then the greater landscape of college basketball, what that means. But not only that, there's disconnect between administration, athletic department, boosters, like that has not been in a straight line. And so when I heard Darren DeVries say at his press conference that everybody is aligned, I laughed actually, because if that's true, that's amazing. But that has not been true at Indiana throughout history. And that's how you wound up with, at times the program was lagging behind in infrastructure. Now that's been fixed. But then you have the disconnect with certain hires and all of that stuff, where some people want one guy, some people want others. It doesn't ever feel like everybody's on the same page. And if that's true, then Indiana is headed the right place. But yeah, it's not necessarily always been true in the past.
Well, and that was an interesting time, because like you said, there was just differing views of how things should go. And that's also you're what, like 6 to 7 years removed from your last Final Four. Sampson is really kind of the first outside hire coach after Knight. Davis was obviously the coach, but that was a different situation. And
it was an interim to full time.
Head coach was an assistant. You didn't have a search like, we're going to go out and grab somebody. And I think there was still that feeling of, we have to win, but we want to win the right way. It is the great time machine question. If you just kind of stop everyone in the middle of that season, it's like, hey, if you fire this guy, just letting you know, you're not going to be in the Elite Eight for the next 17 years. Are you still cool with that? Because I think that's what's changed. And again, we can change topics. Like, I don't think DeVries is doing it the wrong way, but I do think, looking back, like at that time, I think a lot of people were like, hey man, you got to do it the right way. Like, get rid of Sampson. I now look back retrospectively after 17 years of kind of a barren wasteland of winning, kind of being like, yeah, maybe what he did wasn't that bad.
Yeah, no, we want to convince ourselves that was the wrong move. Yeah. And honestly, I'll say, I think that it was the right move given the times and the circumstances. And also, they knew all the bad stuff going on. But once they started digging, they knew all the bad stuff going on behind the scenes with the way the players were acting around campus and all that. Like that became known to them. And I think it was the kind of thing where it was like, we need to end this. Like, you know, because if this has come out, more is going to come out. And, you know, basically when they, you know, Tom Crean arrived not wanting to hit the reset button. I think that gets lost too, because everyone said, you know, remembers the year where he had a ton of walk-ons playing all the time and all that. They won, you know, 6 games or whatever. He didn't want that. He thought he was inheriting a stack of players that, hey, these guys are 22-4. We're going to kick some of them off the team, but we're going to keep like this handful of talented guys and then build from that and whatever. And then he got on campus and they pulled back the curtain. He's like, well, you can have 3 of them. And he was like, can I just do none? And like, you know, like, I mean, I think it was, you know, one of those things where it was like, if I'm not getting 6, like, why have the 3? And, you know, and he knew he would get a little more leeway, I think, if he hit the full reset. And so, yeah, it was a weird time. I mean, I was there. I was covering the team during that for
the other retrospective. And I want to talk
about it was crazy.
But the other retrospective thing, I brought this up on one of our coaching pods with Galen. He was doing a pod with Tony Adranya, and they were talking about Crean, and Tony said something about, you know, the first 3 years, like, you know, you kind of have, you know, can't really count them. I forget what he said. And I was thinking to myself, I talked to Galen, like, nothing has ever swapped in my mind more than the first 3 years of Crean. Cause like in the time, it's like, all right, these years can't count, or the first 2, maybe the third is like the first 2 years. Like,
hey, I mean, it was a smoldering pile of rubble. He had to rebuild.
Pile of rubble, those 2 can't count in his record. And then when you got to the end, it's like, well, I did live through it. Like those do count. And then you kind of look back. It's like, well, but his record really starts from the Zeller years, not. And like whether those 2 years count, like theoretically, to him being good or bad, is kind of, it is oscillated in my mind back and forth. I think I'm at the point now where you kind of have to count it, because it is. I look at it now as like it's 2 years of. I mean, there's a definite asterisk by it, but it's 2 years of my life that are just gone.
Yeah.
Just
well, it's like
nothing happened there.
It's like every president blames the economy in his first 2 years on the previous president. That's what it is. It's like, well, look, I'm digging out from the other guy. It's, you know, you got to give me time to adjust. It's like, you're already running for re-election. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
that was the year of tariffs. We'll call it like the tariff years. All right. Now, politics. Let's talk Woodson. So I'm curious, you know, we've had a good run talking about DeVries. I think it's going to be fun looking forward. We'll get to that near the end. I'm curious your thoughts on, you know, unpacking the Woodson experiment, the Woodson time, because there's, similar to Crean, there's a way that, you know, there's a very simplistic view that some of my friends have told me. It's like, look, man, without Trace Jackson Davis, what was the Woodson years? And it's like, well, not, you know, checks notes, not sure. I'm curious.
I go even further. It was without Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson. Yeah, because those guys were like, Race Thompson wasn't the statistical guy. He wasn't winning all Big Ten. He was, you know, whatever. But those, if you go back when they lost him and Trace, obviously Trace for the talent and Race for keeping the team together and being like the general on defense, essentially, and being like sort of a glue guy, like the ultimate. I think that in fans' mind, Race Thompson has become has so much more appreciated than he was on campus, or others have just forgotten about him. It's one of the two. And that guy was the cornerstone with Trace Jackson Davis. When those 2 guys left, when you lose 2 cornerstones, bad things happen. I mean, it does. And if you've looked at it, the team does not perform in close game situations. They allow themselves to get blown out. All of those things that don't happen when you have leadership. And so there's just been a leadership vacuum at the top since those 2 guys left.
Yeah. What's weird about it is, you know, we all question a lot of things about what Woodson was doing, the way he ran offense, the way he ran schemes and stuff. But, you know, he made Trace Jackson Davis a way better player. Like in that respect, he was able to turn him into a very functional professional player. And, you know, his assist rate went up. Like Trace Jackson Davis, his senior year, was doing things that he had never done before, was passing the ball, was basically a pseudo point guard. I mean, he was unbelievable. So there's a part there where you're like, I can see through the forest a little bit of light. In like, you can really do that. I have a hard time finding any other examples of players that really showed any player development under Woodson, which is kind of the bizarre thing, because it's like he could do it, Or maybe he just did it once and was like kind of the Woodson thing, like, well, I'm good and go have a cigar. Like, we got into the draft. I'm out.
I think a lot of what he did as far as player was just unlocking guys who were already talented. Like Jalen Hood-Schifino came on. It was much better at the end of his freshman year than it was at the beginning. But Jalen Hood-Schifino was a 5-star point guard who was already pretty damn good. It's just a matter of getting him there. Trace, big time recruit. It was a matter of getting him there. Khalil Ware came in after a terrible season in Oregon, became a first-round pick, and it's doing great this year in the NBA. So I think a lot of it for him, and he's probably his NBA experience helped with this, was just unlocking the talent that already existed in guys. He wasn't taking guys who were at their peak already and giving them that 10% more. And that's not a knock on him. Like, the skill he had for that is very important. I mean, that's the whole point of getting a guy from high school to college. I mean, you can recruit your ass off,
right?
But when the guys get on campus, they don't get any better. You've just got a good high school player, you know? And so I think that was his skill more than anything, was giving guys the confidence to realize their potential. And he did that with some guys. He did with other guys. He didn't. I mean, Tamar Bates is a perfect example. That guy has gone on and had a really nice career at Missouri. It just didn't translate at Indiana. And that's not necessarily just a Woodson thing. That happens, to
all
players
the time.
everywhere. Yeah. So, it wasn't like this massive player development factory and we just couldn't get it together on the court. Like, it was selective. But I think that my concern when he got hired, and I was very vocal on our emergency podcast when he got hired, that the problem is that NBA guys going to college basketball do not work. It does not work. It never works. I mean, there are times where guys from college have gone to the NBA and gone back. That's different. You have college experience. But a lot of times what happens with NBA guys coming to college, they think, I have coached on the highest level, which is better than this. I know better. I know what I'm doing. I'm very smart. I'm this, I'm that. Like, I get it. You don't. Let me come teach you, basically. And they don't understand the grind that is college basketball. And I used this example on Assembly Call the other day. Billy Donovan, when he was done in Oklahoma City, could have picked any college job because of his success at Florida, gotten a 10-year, $100 million contract, fully guaranteed, and just gone and been put in whatever effort he wanted at that place, and probably been pretty successful because he's a good coach. And, if he got obsessive about it, could win another national title, whatever, but like could have just cruised at that next place because they would have been happy to have him. Instead, he got a chance to coach the Bulls, who were in a full rebuild, and it's an organization that's been a mess for a while. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to take that over the grind of college basketball. That's what I'm going to do. Brad Stevens, Indiana offered him, he was on thin ice with the Celtics at the time. Indiana offered him the keys to the kingdom, make him the highest paid coach in college basketball. This is back when Woodson was hired, before they hired Woodson. Offered him whatever he wanted, offered to build infrastructure around him so he wouldn't have to do all the things that he doesn't want to do about college basketball, which is all the recruiting road trips and all of these things. They offered him whatever he wanted. And he was on the verge of potentially a breakup with the Celtics. And he said, I'm good. I'm going to stick this out. I'm going to see how this works for me, being on thin ice, not living up to my potential, that people think and all of that. It has worked out for him now.
Right.
But at the same time, that's the disconnect, is guys who've been in college and go to the NBA know what college is like and don't go back, or are choosing not to go back these days. So when the NBA guys come, they don't get it. They don't get that it is a 365-day-a-year job, and you have to be a little bit nuts to enjoy that. And it's the same with college football. College football coaches are a little nuts to enjoy this. And I think that Mike Woodson came in and said, I am going to do what I've always done. I'm going to coach how I've always coached, and I'm going to treat this like an NBA program. They tried to build an NBA program in college basketball where the coaches get a lot of time off. I will say his assistants worked, I think, 10 times harder than anybody else's assistants, because they knew that disconnect. And they were all, a couple of them, they'd been in the game for a while and understood. But he basically put the time in that he would put into an NBA job, thinking that because I'm better at this, because I've been there, I can do it here and this will be easy. And we saw the results, and it was not. And so I think that in the NBA, I think coaching, the act of actually coaching is far more important than it is in college, because college, that's about 50% of your job. The rest is recruiting. it's development, it's, making sure everybody's on your side by doing these barnstorming things and being kind of a politician and all of those things, and connections and, relationships with coaches all over the state, relationship with AAU programs, all of that. There is so much more to the job than coaching. And I think that the NBA guys who come down don't get it. And that was kind of what I telegraphed when I was like, and I hope he proves me wrong. But that's what I see happening. And it's what happened with Indiana. And it's sad because I think that Mike Woodson coming back and making Indiana a very successful program would have been a great story. But I just don't think it ever had the chance of happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say two things. Like, one, to the coaching. I agree. And having, season tickets with the Pacers for years and going to a lot of those games, watching a guy like Carlisle coach.
Yeah.
It's also just a different type of coaching in that I always find it funny. Like, they call timeout. They have a 2.5-minute timeout. Carlisle will talk to his assistants for like a minute 40 and then come in and say like 3 things and then be out. And but it's also like,
the players already know. The players are professionals. They know, and they know what they're supposed to do.
And you can, and like, I look at that end of game situation as a prime example when IU Maryland, where Woodson like, see, like 2 guys go like real quick. He's thinking on the fly and he's doing something that probably would have worked in the NBA. Where it's like, hey, Brunson, you get in, like, and it's like everyone knows, like, oh yeah, I got to get in, and a pro player would get in and he'd understand. All right, I know that whoever I'm guarding is going to go fake to the left. Like, you're coaching in the NBA is much more about just reminding people what they already know in my mind, and kind of being like, hey, don't forget he wants to go left, and don't forget you got to go slip under the screen on him, but go over the screen on him, and just keep that in mind. We're going to run play 4 and like go to it. It's so much more fundamental in X's and O's in college, and it has to be more feel where it's like, I can't do 3 different things before an inbounds play in college. And you saw that with Woodson. The other thing that I was just not prepared for was what you said about like kind of wanting some of the time off, but just how much dissonance it felt like there was between Woodson talking about what was important about being at IU, like just bringing back an alumnus. It felt like that was at least my hope going into it. I had a lot of the same concerns you did, but it's like, all right, at least we're going to bring everyone together. Like, everyone together, and this guy understands what Indiana basketball is, understands what we're about, and understands the mission, and like, we'll work toward that. I don't feel that. Like, after the Woodson experiment, it almost feels like there's another fracture in the fan base, and I was not prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for hearing the stories. Like, immediately, I've hammered on it, but first year, it's like, hey, Woodson's not going to the state title game in Indiana. It's like, what? Like, we're not doing that? And it felt almost like a celebration tour. Like, hey, I've earned this. This is my retirement job, and we're just going to enjoy this for the last couple of years. I don't know. That's the piece that kind of always is going to miff me about the Woodson years, is just the amount of disconnect between bringing this guy back. It felt, if I didn't know, I'd be like, this guy has no idea what Indiana basketball is about. It's wild to say.
Well, and the way he coached was very different than you'd expect. Bob Knight disciple. He's going to coach like that. Very different than Bob Knight. I mean, like, nothing was the same. But I think, I do think that's part of it, is that people, expected one thing from him and got another. But it's always hard to fire a family member. Let's be real. That's why you don't hire family members to work at your company. And because people are going to defend them even when they're not doing their job. And, the perfect example was Patrick Ewing at Georgetown. It's that they were bad under him. Bad. Doesn't mean he didn't love the school. Doesn't mean he didn't care. He probably cared more than anybody on the planet about Georgetown. But he was bad. And at some point, you got to realize if someone's bad, you got to let them go regardless of what your connection to the university got you this job. It should not let you keep this job. You get one or the other. And like, you didn't earn this job. Like, Mike Woodson was not on anybody's radar as a head coach in college basketball or the NBA. He got the job solely because he went to IU and was a great player there. Right. And his if you look at his resume in the NBA, it was not one that warranted the Indiana job and all that comes with it. I think when you hire somebody like that, that's the gift. The gift is not firing them. And I've always said this about high-level college basketball, with how much money is involved. If you, at a place like Indiana, smaller schools, you got to give guys time, whatever. As soon as you know that somebody is not the guy, you fire them immediately. Like, I don't care if it's after year 1. if you know that this guy is not going to win us a national title, and that is the goal at Indiana, is to win a national title again, go to Final Fours, all of that. You want to win a Big Ten title, all of that. I know you do. But the goal is to be nationally relevant again. And that's the amount of money you put in, the resources you have, all of that, the fan base support. You have national championship level that. If you do not have a national championship level coach, like after 1 year, if Darren DeVries is, you realize like that's not the dude. It's not going to happen. This is not, you get rid of him immediately because you cannot waste 4 years on somebody.
Right.
You know, fan apathy these days grows very quickly, and it takes a lot to get them back. Once they're out, it's hard to get them back. And you're also not building that next generation of fan if you're really bad. And so there's a lot of distraction for eyeballs. It's not 1980 anymore. And so as soon as you know that guy is not the guy, you go get the best guy out there. I don't care what his connection is, whatever. It doesn't matter if he's a family member. It doesn't matter if you just hired him, whatever. Move the hell on as fast as possible because you're just wasting time. End of last year, everybody knew Mike Woodson wasn't going to win a national title at Indiana.
Right.
And some people said, no, let's put the big investment in the program. Some boosters, quite frankly, said, let's put a lot of investment in the program. He can do it if he has the right players. He hasn't had the right players. Put all this big investment in, and what happened? You ended up in the same place you were the year before. Regardless of this massive investment, got him all the players he wanted. So you knew last year it was time to move on, and you didn't, and you wasted a year. And the coaches that were available last year, who knows? I mean, I'm happy with Darren DeVries, but there were some coaches available last year very interested in the Indiana job. We know from people we've talked to, all the back channeling that was going on, they opted not to go that direction. And now those guys have been wildly successful elsewhere. Right. And so at some point, you have to just say, this is big time college athletics now. There's a lot of money in it, more than there was 20, 30, 40 years ago. You cannot waste it. It's a precious resource, and you've got to be competing at the top because of the money involved. You'll pay them out. Like, it's not like you're firing them and sending them to, the unemployment line. They're going to get a huge buyout and all of that. So I think that you just have to be harsher and really, look out for yourself instead of anybody else these days.
Yeah, no, I agree. The two comps I've always used, and they're getting older and older now, but you look at North Carolina when they hired Brad Doherty, who was an alumnus.
Yeah,
that third year, they were 19-16, 6-10 in the ACC, but 19-16, and they fired him. The other one that I always go to, I'm going to pull it up real quick, is Kentucky.
And by the way, firing him quick, how'd that end up?
Yeah. Well, I'll get to a point on that, but they Billy Gillespie, it's even worse. I mean, like worse than he was 19-12, 8-8 in the SEC. That's not awful. That's a winning record. That is 500 in the SEC. They fired him after 2 years. Just, we're not going to take this. Now, I agree with you. I also think that what North Carolina and Kentucky also did there is they had somebody identify that it's like, this is somebody that we truly believe. We're not just going to fire him and then like, all right, we'll look around.
Start from scratch.
Let's figure this out. It's like, they're like, no, Calipari is our target. So we're going to move to get that. And, Roy Williams is our target. We're going to move to get that. That's where I've always, I go back to the Archie thing. We're kind of meandering around here, but like the Archie thing.
It's shocking that we're meandering in this conversation.
No flow. With a lot of flow, no direction. Yeah. With Archie, it's like, that was the right hire in that cycle.
I agree.
It just may not have been the right cycle. And
it wasn't the right fit. I mean,
right. This is almost where it's, like in the NBA, last year was the wrong year to have the number one pick. If you can kind of pick it, it's like, I'd like to have the number one pick when Wembanyama is available, not when, Saris or whoever the first pick was last year. And, I wish sometimes that I'm not sure if they're thinking enough like that, where it's like, you're near the end of the Crean era. It's like, this isn't working. We know we're going to have to make a change at some point. Let's also do it when the prospect pool was a really good draft, so to speak, versus you ended up hiring in the Archie cycle. You go a year early before, maybe you go the Nate Oates, maybe not, maybe he's too low end, but it's like, I that's where I get, like, I wonder how much foresight people are giving into this.
Well, and you hope you just got to get lucky. I mean, honestly, you do. You really do. And I mean, last year, I'm not speaking out of turn to say that, the options were probably Bruce Pearl and Dusty May, and you missed out on that. And I think that while there's some discussion about it, I think both guys would have come to Indiana, and you missed out on that. You come back this time, and I think DeVries probably is the best guy available this year. I really do, given his track record, what he's built, all of that, how he coaches. And you're right. It's one of those down years in the NBA draft. It really is. I mean, there's not like a marquee coach available. You're trying to get the next guy coming up. And I mean, Dustin May was that way last year a little bit, but Bruce Pearl has won everywhere he's been. And again, we're talking about the shady guy. Who knows if Indiana would have wanted to swim in those waters again? But you had options.
Right.
This year. Ben McCollum seems like a nice coach, a pretty good coach, and Darren DeVries and some other guys floating around out there. But there was no slam dunk hire this year. And again, it's a lesson in. And again, I'm not saying I'm disappointed with ending up with DeVries at all. I really like him, and I think he's going to be very successful in Indiana. But it is that thing. It's that, the butterfly effect of not making that move last year when you knew it wasn't going to work out, winds you up with a different candidate pool. So yeah, it is very interesting how those things change. If they had let Mike Woodson go a year before, who do they wind up getting? Crean, and then, how does that change? Or, I mean, do they wind up getting Sampson? And then how does that change down the road? Does that lead to Crean and all that stuff? So, it's fascinating how that works, but you are where you are because of what happened. And, I think that very early on, it was clear that the Woodson thing wasn't going to work. I remember getting a text the night they lost to Miami, and it was from the inside the program who was a big Woodson supporter. And it just said that was the end of the best season Mike Woodson will ever have at Indiana. And it was out in the 32, and they had gone, I think, 12-8 in the conference. And he just said, that's the end of the best season he'll have. We won't do better. And I was like, really? Like, I mean, he's building an infrastructure. They made the tournament back-to-back years. And he was like, no, it's not. That's the best it's going to get. And I was just like, whoa, that's not good. Because it was somebody who was a big-time cheerleader of the hire. So
yeah, it didn't work.
It just didn't. And I think that, I think a lot of, and some stuff has come out on this, and I don't want to dwell on it, but there was a lot of like petty squabbles behind the scenes and like things where people just aren't like viewing the actual problems. And they're, it's getting into these little kind of spats behind the scenes and making those the focus as opposed to like the big picture. And I think the effort in recruiting just wasn't there. And I think that was true of Archie too. That's not just a Mike Woodson thing. I will say again, guys like Kenya Hunter and Roseman, like those guys worked really, really hard. They did, but they were up against it. And Indiana was in it for a lot of top recruits because of their effort. And they didn't get them because the relationships just weren't built at the top. And there were guys who wanted any excuse to go to Indiana and were not given one by the people at the top. And so I think Braylon Mullins fits into that category, as does, obviously Liam McNeely and Derek Queen. And there are a couple guys who really loved Indiana, really wanted to go. All the guys
had moments in the tournament, the small moments in the tournament.
I mean, yeah. And just, we're not, I just think it was a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of a head coach in recruiting. And again, Indiana asked for that by hiring a guy who'd never done it before.
And what I think you've mentioned this before. I'm stealing this from you, but it is funny because people will say, well, if you just could have given him like, a good assistant coach or a GM, and it's like they did. They gave him Thad Matta, and he just didn't use him and fired him.
He just didn't speak to Thad Matta. I mean, right. Thad Matta was brought in, and that was a Scott Dolson thing to be like, I'm going to make this palatable to people.
Yeah.
And Thad has always loved Indiana basketball, and he was, whatever. He's always like kind of danced around the periphery of like potentially. For a while, it was potentially he would be the coach, like, all that stuff. And he brought him in. He said, please teach this guy to run a college basketball program. And they never had anything to do with each other. And that was not Thad Matta's fault. Woodson came in and basically said, I know what I'm doing. I don't need a babysitter. I don't need somebody to teach me how to win basketball games. And Thad Matta's like, one of the best Big Ten coaches the last like 30 years. I'm right. My office is literally right down the hall.
Right.
Doors open. I'm just going to leave the door propped open. Come in whenever. Come say hi. Call me. You can yell down the hall. And nothing. I think people envision them like watching film together and like working on nothing, and he was gone. I mean, Thad shouldn't have even unpacked his bags. Like, honestly, it was, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it also, the last historical thing I'll say is this is where, we talk a lot of football on Crimson Cast, obviously. This is where Cignetti changes everything for everybody. And what I mean is, if, there was a time 18 months ago where you still had Woodson and Tom Allen as your head coaches. And my joke was kind of like, if you're Pam Whitten, at some point you go to Dulce, like, hey, what do you do here? Like, how's your hiring going? But
yeah,
the hiring of Cignetti changed everything. Had you kept one more year of Allen, or the hire, that isn't Cignetti doesn't work, there's a world where Dolson just doesn't have the, ability to make this call, where it's like, look, we need a change at athletic director before we make a change at head coach, because we don't trust your steady hand at this. But, you hire Cignetti, and that buys you an unbelievable amount of, rightfully so, goodwill, that you can now move with this. So
right.
I think things are drastically worse if we don't have the Cignetti effect in IU athletics with IU football, because you're probably burning it down to the studs again.
Well, yeah, and Dolson wouldn't have had the cachet to start doing what he did, and
right.
Basically, from how I understand it, and I've been told this by multiple people, is in Atlantis, where they got blown out twice. That's when he started sort of consolidating behind the scenes, not saying like, I'm going to oust him, but consolidating support behind the scenes, that if this goes off the tracks,
right,
we got to make a move. And there were people genuinely, Mike Woodson, I mean, we've heard from, his interactions. He said this a lot, and I know people have said this, people have shouted it down, but he basically was telling people, I'll be here as long as I want. This is my job, and I'll be here as long as I want. And we've heard that from other podcasts. We've heard that online, and people have shouted it down. So that was happening behind the scenes, is he was telling people, I'm going to be here as long as I want. And the reason why is because he had the backing of some very powerful people.
Right.
And so he thought he was secure, and he had the legroom to do whatever he wanted. I think after the Cignetti hire, Dolson felt like, okay, I can push back against this now. I'm in a position where I've proven myself. And now if I think we need to move on, I'm going to exert myself and do that. And he was right. I mean, and so I think Atlantis was around the time that it started to, if this doesn't get better, we're moving on. And that's sort of how it played out. And I think that they wanted to give him a dignified exit, but they were ready to get it done pretty quickly. And I think the big thing, well, we all know why it happened when it happened. It was because Michigan was coming to town with Dusty May.
Yeah.
And that is why it happened when it happened. It had nothing to do with Mike Woodson deciding at that point that I'm going to retire. It was Indiana being like, this is going to get real ugly, and an Indiana legend is going to be buried. We cannot have the visual or the audio of that happening. And
well, it's a bummer. I hope we can move forward. I want to talk to Vrees here at the end, but
yeah, sure.
It's a bummer, but it is nice to know that IU fans are being listened to at some point, in that, it felt like that the final dagger blow for Archie was them getting booed off the court in, Indianapolis.
Yes.
And then it does feel like not only the Michigan game, but that loss to Illinois, where the doors are blown off. People are, getting cranky in the stands, and people are leaving at halftime. I'm not advocating booing. I'm not saying you should boo or yell or any of that stuff, but it does come to a point at some point for fans where you're like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I'm frustrated with this. And it does feel like at least the athletic department can feel when, like, ooh, it shouldn't have to get to that point. It's like a car that's, revving in the 900s. Like, we shouldn't have to be that high, but it does feel like those are moments where the department's like, we can't let this get much worse than where we're at.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. I think that it was, fan sentiment does matter when it's reasonable. And there was no reasonable fan who could say, like, this is going great,
right.
And so I think that that's where it came. Now, if it's year two, and again, I'm of the opinion, as soon as it's not the guy, get rid of him. I've said that. But like, if it's year two and they're decent but not great, and fans are getting, are booing them at home for a bad performance, that's not going to lead to much. But I mean, after you're in your fourth year and you're getting, pantsed by Illinois on your home floor, like, you're done. Like, I mean, it's
After you just got curb stomped at Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, fans are allowed to be upset at that point. And I think that, the sentiment does matter because those are your paying customers. I mean, let's be real. Those are your paying customers. And at some point it has to be looked at like that. And DeVries is getting, I think it's, we make it $5 million a year for 6 years. He should be expected to produce a $5 million a year for 6 years, performance, just like Woodson should have been able to live up to his contract. No excuses. You're making that much money.
So we look ahead to the DeVries era. The thing that I'll say with that I thought was funny, that people, as we did our coach preview on Crimson Cast, which oddly we never got to DeVries. He was on our list of like the next round of guys we were going to do. Thought we had a little more time. Some of the comments were funny that, we would do some of these guys like McCollum. Galen had his concerns with him, but, and DeVries kind of falls into a different camp. But people are like, when we did the Archie thing, it's like, we can't, another young guy, we need somebody with more experience. We already did Archie. And what I find funny is I did a VIP video about this, that we've already hit every coach sector. Like, this is unfortunately what happens when you hire 6 coaches in 10 years, in 15 years, whatever. It's like we did the assistant move up with Davis. That didn't work awesome. We tried the guy with a little bit has a checkered past with Sampson, has real high success. That didn't work out on our end. You try the guy who has a Final Four and has shown they can do high level success in Crean. That ended up didn't working out. You get the hot young coach who had one good year of tournament success. That with Archie, that didn't work out. Like, we tried the alumnus with an MBA. Like, at some point, you're going to have to retry something because there aren't other archetypes you can go to unless you're just going to like hire somebody at a D3. Like, I just found it funny that people were so burned by the Archie thing, where I just go back to, like, it didn't work. We don't need to talk more Archie, but it's like, that doesn't need to be an archetype you take off the board. Like, just because it didn't work, like, you look through all the coaches, getting a young up and coming coach is the way most teams do it.
Yep. And also I'll say this, like, Archie didn't work not because of the method of you getting him. He didn't work because he wasn't a fit. And he wasn't like a guy built to handle the spotlight. Like, here's the thing. Archie, and these days you're starting to see guys do that. Perfect example is Greg McDermott at Creighton.
Right.
He's going to stay there for his whole time, for the rest of his career, and not move up to a bigger job. And that's a smart thing to do. And Archie probably could have stayed at Dayton and become their greatest head coach. Like, of all time, like, he knows how to coach. He's just not good at the big program things that Indiana needed. And at least I believe that's the case. I think he knows basketball. I think he knows how to coach. And I think his teams play tough basketball. Sometimes guys hit their ceiling, and there's just, and you send them back down there and they'll probably do pretty well. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily a method or a type of coach problem. It was the specific coach at the specific place.
Yeah. And so now you have DeVries.
Yeah.
At first it was a name a little bit out, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. You get kind of caught up in the big names. You look at those things. I had my eyes in other areas. So I'm just like, oh, okay. Like, but the more I dig into it, it does feel like a good fit. And it feels like DeVries could have some real success here. I like a lot of what I saw at Drake. X's and Joe's did a really good breakdown about, the number of wins that a program has had and how somebody brings it up. Or you look at like Archie, like Dayton was already averaging, and the numbers are not right here, like, 20 wins a season, and he got him to 23. So it's like he has a 3-win gap. Drake was just
awful
when he got there, and he, is like a 15-win differential. And part of that's like, maybe that's why McCaskill was doing so well at Drake. He maybe on that coattails, don't know. But then what really got me is the West Virginia thing. When you really dug into it, it's like, because initially it's like, man, we're getting a guy who didn't even make the tournament last year. But it's like, this is a team that had 100% turnover, like 100%. And that's why I think it's funny now. Everyone's freaking out about us in the portal. It's like this stuff will get figured out. Some people might come back. Like, now is not the best time to take a snapshot of what your thoughts are on the program. But B, if anybody can do it, that guy just did it at West Virginia. I think we have more resources and a better talent pool to cultivate from. And he just got a team that probably should have been in the tournament at West Virginia. And oh, by the way, 2 of his best players got hurt during the season, and he still was able to do it.
And he should have been in the tournament, by the way. There's no argument that they should have been on.
Right. So I'm pretty bullish on what I'm seeing from DeVries thus far. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that, you look at track record. First of all, he was an assistant at Creighton, which is one of the most consistent programs in college basketball, and they do a really good job. He was there for
the McDermott coaching tree is turning into a very solid tree.
And he was there for like 17 years. I mean, he was like a big part. It's not like this guy, it's crazy when you look at his resume that he's only 49, because it's 17 years as an assistant. And he picked his spot with Drake and saw a program that I think that he knew he could develop. And he did a really good job of doing that. I mean, as you said, like the turnaround there is dramatic for them. And then to move to West Virginia, which won, I think, 8 games last year, and take them to 19 without 2 of your best players. Right. I mean, crazy turnaround. The guy knows college basketball. If you want to emulate a program that's a smaller program, Creighton's a hell of one. They're fun to watch. They play a great style of basketball. They're always good. They're always consistent. So I think that, I was happy with it. And if you look at, where he went with Drake, let's just use that as an example, because that's the longest term. His first year won 24 games. They went 12-6 in conference. Second year struggled 8-10. And that was the COVID year. So he didn't, no postseason. But then 15-3, 13-5, 15-5, 16-4 in conference. He, against the teams he knows, he beats them. He had a 70% winning percentage in conference at Drake, 73% overall. And then he went to West Virginia. Again, West Virginia was a down program, and people are upset. A good thing is, like, when a coach leaves and people are upset, that's a good clue. Yeah. And again, to win 19 games without your top scorer, which is his son, and another top player, to win 19 games like that, I mean, Indiana would lose a player and fall apart, and he was able to keep them together. I think it's.
I would also say too that West Virginia team finished the season with those injuries. They were still the 14th best defensive efficiency in the country.
Yeah.
With 2 of your guys gone, the offensive was only 133rd, but I think that.
But they lost their best offensive players.
You lost your best players, but you still had one of the best defensive teams in the country, and that's something that we've just continued to harp on Crimson Cast. And I hate to be all wonky metrics guy, but you look at the teams that have success in March, year in, year out, they are just unbelievably efficient in offense and defense. They are in the top 25 of that metric almost every single year.
Time.
There's very few outliers of teams that are not in one of those, not in the top 25 in both of those categories. And normally when you see a team that's outside of the top 25 in a category, they are 1 or 2 in the other. So
look, right now at the Final Four,
yeah.
Auburn's 3rd in offense, 8th in defense. Florida, 2nd in offense, 10th in defense. Houston, 10th in offense, 1st in defense. Duke, 1st in offense, 4th in defense. Yeah. All in the top 10 of
last year. I'm sure it would be the same.
Exactly. And so
the fact that, and you look at his defensive numbers when he was at Drake, they were starting to, 113th, 101st, 40th, 73rd. Like, he's kind of in that range. He's pulling it, you're not going to have a top 10 defense year in, year out at Drake, but the first year you have some resources, you get there at West Virginia. I'm very interested to see what he does, how he pulls things, but I think there's a world where we could have a quick turnaround in year 1. I don't think we're going to win the Big Ten year 1, but I don't see why we couldn't have, be 7, 8, 9 seed in the tournament in year 1.
I expect a tournament team next year. And I'll say this, I think also at West Virginia, when he got some major conference resources, he started recruiting really well too. I mean, their class
at West Virginia than we had.
Their class at West Virginia was really nice. I don't know if any of them are going to come. I mean, I know it's, because a lot of that is ties to picking the right assistants and the assistants having relationships. So Chester Frazier, I know, did a really good job recruiting for them. I would have loved to have Chester Frazier at Indiana. I know some people have a problem with that, but I would have loved it. So I think that, some of that, I don't know if those guys are all just going to follow him. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, he had a great recruiting class when he finally got some resources. That was very encouraging to me as well. It's not only what he did on the court, but like the fact that like he moved from Drake to West Virginia and wasn't going after Drake players. Right. He moved up and, knew what he needed to target to win at that level and got the guys. Unfortunately, most of them probably won't end up at West Virginia, but you know, and you look at who they're attached to in the transfer portal early, and it's the guys you want, you know, and again, transfers don't always work out, you know, because you're not, I feel like the net is so wide with high school players, you can kind of pick and choose and get the team you want. Whereas with transfers, you're kind of like, well, he doesn't fit exactly, but he kind of does. Like, let's see how this works, you know, and it can sometimes work and sometimes doesn't. But I think that yeah, that was what impressed me the most, is not only on court stuff, but it looks like he knows how to set up a program infrastructure and get the guys he wants to get.
Yeah. We got his son. That's a good thing.
Yeah. I thank God that his son was like, yeah, Dad, I'll play for you. You know, how could you imagine? Like, I'm not going to go to West Virginia anymore, but I'm definitely not coming to Indiana with you. I'm done with this guy as a head coach.
Yeah. I'm bullish. I really am. I've come around, and of course we're all fans, are going to be, but I think it seems like for the first time we are kind of going in that right direction. You know, the only thing I would say, you know, Archie was a little bit awkward in his press conference. DeVries definitely felt like, you know, he's a coach guy. He's not a rah-rah guy, but it doesn't, dude, it's one press conference, but it doesn't feel like he's scared of the spotlight or the moment. It just seems like he's not, you know, going to have great press, you know, moments. But look at it too. Look at, you know, Signetti is awesome and he has good sound bites, but he's also a little bit like, he's not great, you know, on things either. He's kind of wonky with his stuff as well.
Yeah, he's not a media darling. Like he said some funny stuff, and so people latched onto it. You know, the Google me stuff. But other than that, like, name anything he said. You know, he's not exactly a charismatic guy. Whereas Tom Crean was the exact opposite, super charismatic. But you know, it's about how they are able to connect with the players is what matters. And yeah, you got to get the fans on your side and everything, but winning is how you get the fans on your side.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I said, is in the end, it's such the easy answer, but it is the answer. I like what I'm seeing. This will all be judged in 36 months. And in 36 months, if we are winning and we're, you know, looking to be a protected seed most years out of not, then this is going to work. And if we're not, then it's not. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm at the point now, 46, I've been through too many coaches. Like, I'm a fan. I'm going to root for it. I want things to go well, but I'm not going to be so tied emotionally to the coaches until they do something to make me tied to them. And it just is kind of my feeling. But I think in 2 years, we'll have the answer, and we'll all inherently know after the next 2 seasons. Because I think everybody knew after the first 2 years of Archie, everybody knew probably after the first 2.5 years of Woodson, we'll say, you know, where it was going. That'll be our answer. Right now, it's all just kind of window dressing, but I think we'll know that answer in 2 years. It's not the fun, sexy answer. Be like, oh, you can pick one or the other, but we'll know in 2 years.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And that's where we are as a fan base. I mean, I think that what you want as a fan, I mean, you want success, but at this point you just want hope. And I do feel like it's a lot lighter around Indiana basketball in the last couple of days. I think the big thing is you got a guy with a track record. You got a guy who's done this in college basketball. And I think people forgot how important that was when Mike Woodson was hired. You know, like,
but I also love to hear he's a grinder. Like, he's always out there working, and like, just knowing that, seeing him at the state title game, working recruits, like, it's just like, okay, it feels like we're kind of back. And this guy is, I go to bed knowing, like, I think he's out there hustling his ass off every day to try and get players. And I'm not sure, I haven't felt that in probably 5 years.
And look, there are going to be bumps in the road. I'm not trying to tell people that, you know, we're on the gravy train now, but I mean, there's going to be bumps in the road. I mean, every coach has those, you know, where you lose a game you should have won and all that. But I do feel like the trajectory of the program is going to start heading up at this point. And you do have to give somebody time to implement their systems. So I know, because I'm sitting here saying, well, if you know after year one, fire him. No, but you know, but I do think you need to give somebody time to develop what they want to develop and go where they want to go. And as long as that feels positive the whole way, I think people will forgive it a little bit if it's a struggle in the beginning. But I don't expect him to struggle greatly off the jump, as long as they're able to have some luck in the transfer portal, maybe get a couple different high school recruits in. It sounds like Sicily's all in. But you know, trying to see if there's anybody else who wants to switch up, but at the same time, he has to get some of the right players, has to, you know, get his stuff together. And this roster, I think in year one will probably not be what it looks like moving forward. But I don't think it's going to be far off. And I think that this can be a competitive team next year.
The last thing I'll say, you don't always know you kind of know after year 2 or 3, but year one, it would be nice just to have a good first year, because Archie, again, came out against Indiana State at home, lost 90-69, and then quietly, like 2 games later, lost to Seton Hall 84-68.
I remember that.
And it's like, man, and then don't get shellacked by Duke and Michigan and Louisville, and then lost to IPFW. I mean, that was by the middle of December, you had lost to Indiana State, Indiana, and IU Fort Wayne. Both those 2 games were at home. You lost to Fort Wayne, 92-72. You lost by 20. I mean,
that was where they hit like 23s, wasn't it, or something like that?
But I think we're all looking around like, what's going on? Like, this was supposed to be different. And then, Woodson started off better, but did finish that first season. They lost 5 of 7. And, they made the tournament, but I would say going into the Big Ten tournament, they were not in the NCAA tournament. They were on life support. And even in that game against Michigan, they kind of zoned out for the first 15 minutes. Yeah. They had I remember saying, I think they had 48 good minutes of play in the Big Ten tournament. It was like 8 minutes against Michigan, 40 against Illinois, and then they played pretty well against Iowa. But all that to be said, there was a lot of warning signs in the first year of both Archie and Woodson. And so that is my hope, is that under DeVries in the first year, we don't have one of those warning signs. Yeah. Like, there's not a 5-game losing streak. There's not just an ass kicking to a state rival that's not named Purdue at home. I hope we can just have a first year where it's like, all right, this feels like we're actually moving in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think, I think that we won't. I just, there might be a rough game or 2, but I don't think it's going to be, the message is going to be as clear as it was with those other guys. So yeah, I think that what you want from year one is just the team to feel like they're not going to be in every game. You're going to have a blowout here or there, like randomly. I mean, that just happens in the Big Ten these days. But I think that what you want is just to feel like this team is competitive and can compete at a Big Ten level and be trending in that right direction as you get other players. And also you want to land some recruits, to have the hope for next year too, instead of having it feel like you are resetting the roster every single year, which I know happens a lot in college basketball these days, but you want to have that core of players who's coming in and building, and then you're just supplementing from the transfer portal, as opposed to wiping the slate clean every year, which is where it's felt like we've been the last couple of years.
Agreed. One date to note, I was just pulling this up, a game that would be nice, a good way to start this off, December 20th, 2025, IU, Kentucky in Rupp Arena. It's a tough putt.
I'm trying to go so bad.
Oh, really?
I'm going to try and go. Yeah. I'm working on it.
That'd be fun. We'll see. My dad and I used to
even if you don't go to the game, drive down to the neighborhood and go to a bar and watch with fans or something.
I would.
That'd be a good. I'm going to pitch that as a back home network event. A bar and
let's do it. Oh, I love that idea. Let's do a back home network event around the game at Rupp Arena.
Even if you can't go to the game, get a bar, meet up at a bar.
Okay, there we go. We'll do it. We'll ask Galen to probably do all the work, and we'll just show up and stick around. That's the
We're co-pilots, not pilots.
Co-pilots, not pilots. Ryan, it's been awesome, man. Love having you on. It's great talking with you. Catch Ryan on Assembly Call. You guys got to promote any good Assembly Call stuff coming up?
We're gonna do something this week. We haven't decided, but keep it tuned to our Twitter account. We'll mention it and we'll send it out in the email and everything. But yeah, we're trying to do one a week right now. Everybody's schedule is a little bit in flux, but we're trying to nail down once a week. We're gonna get together and just talk about everything that's going on.
I'm also excited to know who gets emergency pods when they sign with us, or when we get recruit flips. Like, that's always a fun thing in this time of year, is like, oh, we got somebody. And I famously don't pay a ton of attention. I pay a little more attention to the transfer portal, but it's like, oh, if Assembly Call's doing an emergency pod, this is a good signing. Like, all right, this is good. Yeah. So hopefully we get like 4 emergency pods.
Yeah, we really should rename that, because emergency makes it sound negative. It should be like excitement pod. Like, I don't know. Jared and I'll spitball.
Workshop that. The only thing I'll say to you to pass on to Jared is, like, it would be fun when Tucker DeVries actually announces. I know it's all just like assumed. It hasn't actually happened. Yeah. You should do an emergency pod for that.
Yeah, just for that. Like, we got this player, man. He could shoot. He could shoot.
Just go at it. Ryan, awesome having you. Check him on Assembly Call. They're doing fantastic stuff. As is everybody on the Back Home Network. I appreciate everybody for listening. It's been fun. And with that, co-pilots are wrapping up. Thank you guys for listening. Until next time, this is Scott signing off.